Dramatic police reform could be on the way for the US city of Minneapolis. Members of the City Council have pledged change after a huge turnout at weekend protests. Demonstrators have marched every day for nearly 2 weeks, demanding justice for George Floyd, who died in the hands of white police officers.
A step that would have seemed unthinkable just 2 weeks ago. There are now plans to disband the police department in Minneapolis, the city where George Floyd was killed. The majority of the City Council have pledged to do away with the department and replace it with a community-led safety model.
Our commitment is to end our city's toxic relationship with the Minneapolis Police Department, to end policing as we know it, and to recreate systems of public safety that actually keep us safe.
New York has also promised to relook the relationship between police and the people.
We will be moving funding from the NYPD to youth initiatives and social services. The details will be worked out in the budget process in the weeks ahead. But I want people to understand that we are committed to shifting resources to ensure that the focus is on our young people.
The pledges for reform come after 2 weeks of unprecedented protests across the United States, fueled by George Floyd's death at the hands of a white policeman. In contrast to heated clashes between police and protesters in previous days, the weekend's demonstrations were overwhelmingly peaceful. In many cities, police appeared to back down from overly aggressive tactics. US President Donald Trump has also ordered National Guard troops to begin withdrawing from the capital.
And for more, we're joined by Simon Marks. Simon, these are major reforms being promised by Minneapolis and even in New York. Is this the start, the beginning of bigger change across the country?
I think without question, Glenda, I mean, 3 words, defund the police, have suddenly become the mantra for people demanding reform. That huge Black Lives Matter road sign that was painted in the middle of Washington, D.C. last week, you can see it from space, has now had those 3 words added to it. Now, what they're saying in Minneapolis is that this is just the beginning of a very long process, but it is a process that is now inevitable. A veto-proof majority of members of the Minneapolis City Council have declared not just that every attempt to reform the police force in that particular city has failed, but that they now consider the police force in Minneapolis to be unreformable, unsalvageable. So months, maybe years of debate lie ahead in that particular city about what you would replace the police with. What kind of specific tasks might, for example, be meted out to mental health professionals, community, some sort of community security agency. What exactly does a city look like if it doesn't have a classic police force? But this notion of defunding the police, and President Trump has seized on it and said it's a ludicrous idea because millions and millions of Americans pick up the phone and dial 911 when they need some kind of an emergency response from the police. It is definitely catching fire, and it's going to become an issue in the presidential election, as much of an issue for President Trump to push back against as it will be an issue for Joe Biden, the Democrats' candidate this November, to formulate some cogent ideas around and advance. It changes the nature of the conversation that is taking place here in the United States.
Simon, Derek Chauvin, the policeman who knelt on George Floyd's neck and killed him, he makes his first court appearance today. What can we expect?
Well, it's a bit of a formality, to be honest, Steve. I mean, he will have the charges read to him. He will be asked if he understands the charges against him. And remember, those charges have been kicked up a notch. He's now facing second-degree murder charges in the case of George Floyd, not third-degree murder charges. That means that the authorities in Minnesota now believe they can prove that it was his intent to kill George Floyd as he sat on George Floyd with his knee pressed against Mr. Floyd's neck neck for fully 8 minutes and 46 seconds. He'll be asked to confirm his identity. We'll learn more about the extent of the legal representation that he has at his disposal, and then there'll be conversations about bail and setting the date for the next hearing. I think at this point bail is almost guaranteed not to be offered, given the vehemence of feeling among community members in Minneapolis. But it will also give people in Minneapolis and around the world an opportunity almost certainly to see him, and that has the potential to be an image that resonates with those people who have been taking to the streets of Minneapolis as they decide, and activists in other parts of the country decide, what is their next move now that that weekend of protests here in Washington and elsewhere has come to an end.
Thanks for that. Simon Marks speaking to us from Washington, D.C.